All right, you guys, wrap up your last thought. I'll give you a minute. Okay, well, this morning we're going to just jump right into teaching because I know you guys are really looking forward to it. Actually, this is a topic that's been requested to us for several years now. Typically, at the end of a mom-to-mom year, we have some sort of survey or evaluation or just an open, just an open discussion of what else can we share with you moms that you would really like to hear about. What topics would you like covered? And you guys are fabulous and always give us so many ideas, and it's hard to cover all of them in a year, but we knew we wanted to make this topic a priority this year. So way back in the beginning of planning, we thought we're going to put it on the calendar this year, and God just really worked out the timing of it. And so we're really, really honored to have Brandon and Jenna share with us this morning. Brandon is our youth pastor here currently, but why I say the timing is great is because shortly he's going to be transitioning into the family pastor role, and so this topic just really it really encompasses both of those areas for him and the way that God has gifted both of them in ministry and their experience and just who they're going to be ministering to. So in my family we call him Bobo. You're welcome to call him that. But this is Brandon and Jenna, if you guys want to come on up, we're just going to just welcome them, you guys, with us. They're going to share just the how and when and why of talking to your kids about sex. Actually, at church on Sunday, I think that Sean got up and did one of the announcements, and I heard all he said was something about moms come, and they're going to talk about sex. So that wasn't exactly accurate. So it's a little bit different. And on your tables, you have just the blank mom-to-mom note sheets. Those are on your table this morning because we will have a Q&A time towards the end. So if there's a question that pops up while they're sharing or while Dawn is going to share for our peer perspective, something that you want to ask anonymously or put your name, doesn't matter, feel free to write those down. We will collect those during the break. There's going to be this basket over on the resource table. So if maybe the mentor moms would like to scoop those up and put them in, if some moms don't feel comfortable putting their question in, So just keep that in mind, jot those down, and we'll try and get to as many of those questions and answers as we can. So I'm going to just welcome up Brandon and Jenna and turn it over.
Thanks, Megan. Jen, you can have the nice cushion chair.
Thanks.
Yeah, anytime.
I don't know if I'm on.
You are.
Oh, cool.
Jake's got you, right?
Thanks.
We're good? We're live? Sweet. Thanks for having us. I was so humbled and honored to be asked to come to Mom. It's been a life dream of mine, actually, since I knew about how awesome Jenna and her sisters are and doing this awesome just space for you guys to come and learn and discuss and share just how to be awesome moms. And just to start off, we've been in youth ministry for over 10 years, and there's two things that I know. One, kids love to talk about sex at any age. And two, parents don't talk to their kids about sex at any age. And we've looked at, just time and time again, conversation after conversation, where a girl will come to Jenna, a guy will come to me and say, I'm struggling with porn or looking at this. And we ask them, hey, did your parents talk to you about sex and have this talk? And most of the time they say, no, my parents never talked to me about this. And they look at me like, I really wish they did. And so we're here today to look at just the ways that you can help prevent them being curious and having that curiosity lead them down paths they shouldn't ever go down. And there's an old saying that says an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And so as you think about that, as we talk today, this is really looking at the why, the when, and how to talk to your kids about sex so that you're really helping prevent the curiosity leading them down dangerous paths. And so we'll be looking at that in a minute. And there's a lot we could say on this, and my expertise isn't as exhaustive as I wish it would be, and we have limited time, but we do have some helpful resources we're going to put in front of you and put in your direction.
Right, so we have 3 kids, 2, 3, and almost 5. He says basically 5. So we obviously don't have all this expertise talking to older kids or teenagers of our own children about sex, but we talk every single week to teen boys and teen girls about this topic. So some of what we're going to be sharing is just from our experience talking to teens about sex. And the little bit we have as parents beginning to have those conversations with toddlers and our basically 5-year-old about the age-appropriate things that we can start teaching them about God's design for sex. But a lot of it, what we're going to be sharing with you guys is from some really helpful resources. We have read through a lot of articles and lots of books, but I'm going to share basically 3 of them that we found the most helpful for us and most practical. And I would encourage you guys, especially with these 2 books, to pick them up. You can order them on Amazon for not a lot of money. This one is a Focus on the Family book, and it's called The Focus on the Family Guide to Talking with Your Kids About Sex. It breaks down the different ages and stages and what's appropriate at what age. A lot of what we're sharing is from this book. Same with this one. You guys, most of you have probably heard of Josh McDowell. He and his wife Dottie wrote this book. It's called Straight Talk with Your Kids About Sex. Also super helpful. These are the 2 that we probably would recommend the most. And then these are like little, I don't know what you call these, little book guides. This one's The Talk. They're all on the theme of The Talk. But the author is Luke Gillerkson. And he also has written some articles for a website called Covenant Eyes. If you want to write down Covenant Eyes, we don't have it written down anywhere for you, but that's a website, and it's super. It's also super helpful for as your kids are getting older. Just this talk and how to help protect them, and protect their eyes, and protect their heart. So some of our stuff is from this as well.
That's right. So we're gonna jump in. Sorry, I'm so excited. Can't tell. The next point is why. And as Jenna talked about these books really help you talk with your kids about this topic, about sex, and so you can walk through kind of the pages and the content with them through those books. And as all the details and everything we're both excited to share with you, we really needed to boil it down because I'm a guy and all the info I forget. Jenna reminds me, which is awesome. But this is the bottom line. So make sure you remember this, share it with your husband. This is the bottom line. If you take away anything from today, it's this. Your kids will talk to you about the things that you talk to them about. And so your kids are going to talk to you about whatever conversational topics you bring up with them, you engage them on. And it's important that you're talking to them about Jesus, the most important relationship they're going to have, and sex, because it's so damaging to not only their relationship with God, but their peers as well.
So research indicates that fewer than 20% of parents actually engage in meaningful conversations with their kids about sex, which means that, which we found to be super true, if not even higher than this percentage, over 80% of our teens have never had a conversation with their parents about sex, which is so sad, and it's such a disservice to our kids. I think the majority of parents probably have good intentions. They probably are like, yeah, I'm going to talk to my kid about sex at some point, and they're waiting maybe for that perfect time, but it's such an awkward subject, and they just don't ever end up bringing it up until they realize, well, they probably already know anyways, which is what we've experienced a lot with the teens in our youth group over the past 10 years that we've been in youth ministry. I've talked to so many girls who have been so broken. It makes me so sad because by the time they're 13, 14, they have so much heartache over this topic that they have never talked to their mom about. And they have moms, but the moms aren't talking to them about it. So it's just something that we're super passionate about because it is one of the things that affects all of us as human beings. And it's like, talk to them about Jesus and talk to them about sex because it's something that affects your whole life. It's something that an act that you can do as a young child. I mean, we hear stories of kids having some form of sex in bathrooms in elementary schools. That's going to affect them their whole life. So it's a big deal. So please talk to them about it, because also if you are feeling like, but it's such an awkward subject, I don't know how to bring it up. We talk to them as teenagers, and they're hungry for the truth. They want to know, and they want to talk about it. But because so often parents are too embarrassed to bring it up, our teenagers are too embarrassed to bring it up to their parents. So if at young ages we can start talking about this, like it's okay to talk about, it's something we need to talk about, it's healthy to talk about, don't be embarrassed to talk about it with me, then they know they can come to you.
Yeah, and as we look at our role and the responsibility of a parent, it's primarily to make disciples who love Jesus, know God, his word, and the plan and purpose for sex in their lives. And it's really about you guys being intentional with that ongoing conversation, because if you're not engaging your kids, they're going to find ways. They're going to talk to their friends, they're going to get their friend's phone, talk to Siri or Alexa and Google something, and they're going to find out more than what they need to sooner than they should. And so that's where you as parents, it's so important that you see yourself as that disciple maker and equipping them to know Jesus and know what his plan is for sex. And the author of Proverbs in chapter 1 verse 8 says, hear my son, your father's instructions, and do not forsake your mother's teaching. And it just highlights the importance that God has put parents in the role of the primary disciple maker and sex educator for your kids. So now we're going to talk about when. So when should you start this conversation with your kids?
We get asked this question a lot, like, when do I have the sex talk with my kid? And I'm going to encourage you guys, start now. Don't wonder, when do I have this big talk? It's not like one big talk you're going to have with your kids. Start now. Start as preschoolers, giving them the information that they're able to understand and take in that's helpful for them now, so that it doesn't ever have to be this big talk. It's kind of this ongoing conversation you get to have with their kids as they grow, as they mature. Proverbs 22:6 says, train up a child in the way he should go, even when he is old, he will not depart from it. I love this promise that God gives us, that when we teach our children God's truths when they're young, they will remember that when they're older. So let's start sharing with our kids when they're young. The Kaiser Foundation reports that medical research and public health data tell us that when young children want information, advice, and guidance, they turn to their parents first. But once they reach the teenage years, they tend to depend more on friends, media, and other outsiders for information. So let's, as parents of young children, take the opportunity now, since our children naturally come to us first anyways, to be the ones to instigate these types of conversations, so that hopefully the goal is that when they're teens, they don't feel like they have to go everywhere else for information. Their whole lives we've shown them, no, come to mom and dad first. We'll talk to you about this. Ask us anything. Be open and honest, so that they know when they're teenagers or whenever, when they have these questions, they don't have to look outside of the home. They can come to mom and dad first, because I promise you, if they have a question about something, they're going to ask it. So who do you want them asking? Do you want them asking you so you can share God's truth, or do you want them asking everything else? Which they're not going to get God's truth if they're asking the internet or friends or even teachers at school. Basically, everything our culture has to say about sex is the opposite of what God tells us about sex.
Yeah, and a key here too is you're looking at when to start that conversation with your son or your daughter is really to keep in mind it's more about the maturity appropriateness rather than a specific age being the appropriate time to engage, because oftentimes the oldest will be a little bit more sheltered, naive, and experiencing things for the first time. And as you begin to talk with your oldest child about sexual things, it's hopefully going to leak out into the family at large, because you're going to be a family that talks about real things and things that need to be processed and shared in the home. And so the younger siblings are probably going to catch wind and maybe even be more naturally curious. And so don't be alarmed by that, but just, again, use the wisdom that God's given you. That's such a great truth that I hope you hear, is that God's already given you the wisdom and the knowledge to know when and how to talk to your kids about sex. And so as you see them becoming mature, and it's appropriate to engage them and not wait for a specific age being the appropriate time. It's more about the maturity being the appropriate time to engage your kids.
Mm-hmm. So I think there's this fear amongst parents that talking to our kids too soon about sex will like somehow damage or hurt them. So we're like so afraid to bring it up maybe too soon, or the idea that if we're always talking about sex, won't it maybe like encourage them or make them more curious and they'll be more prone to like having sex? But research actually says that that's not true. Research done by the Campaign for Our Children found that when parents teach their kids the facts about sex, their kids are less likely to have sex as a teen, less likely to become pregnant or get someone pregnant as a teen, which goes hand in hand. And they're more likely to talk to their parents about important issues in his or her life, which I really like that last one because it shows us that when we're willing to talk to our kids about sex, it tells them, we're willing to talk to you about anything. No subject is too awkward. So with other important issues in their life, they're going to know that they can talk to us about it. They don't have to look elsewhere for that information. So I encourage you guys, commit early on to always being honest with your kids and really work on creating that just comfortable and open environment for your kids to be able to come talk to you about anything. So it was kind of funny. I had to read it to Brandon one night. It was just this last week, and as we've been like reading and praying about this topic, I was like flipping through Facebook, laying in bed at night, and one of my girlfriends from college posted. She quoted, "Mommy, how does Jesus put a baby in someone's belly?" And then she said, "Any and all advice, please. Like, go now." And her daughter's 8. And so I just thought, oh, this is like exactly what we're talking about. And I was curious about what some of the comments were, and I started reading them, and I was like shocked. I'm like, these are what like older women in our life, like, because you can see their picture. I'm like, this must be what they told their kids. No wonder nobody knows what God's designed. Like, some of them were funny, but I thought it was so sad because I talk with the teenage girls every week about sex, and I'm like, no wonder they ask me questions because these are the answers people gave her. I don't know, baby. You'll have to ask Jesus that question when you get to heaven. Okay? Another person wrote, ask her what she thinks the answer is, then tell her, yes, you are right. Another one wrote, well, God creates miracles just like you, because at her age, she isn't developmentally ready for any of that information. And this is my favorite. Just dazzle and deflector. Hey, is that an ice cream shop? Let's go.
Yeah, so as terrifying as those responses are, that's really what the majority of parents, that's the approach they take with talking to their kids about sex, or the latter, not talking to their kids about sex. So the biggest fear, I think, and barrier is parents just don't know how. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to talk to your kids about sex. And every time I talk about this topic or technology, it's especially for parents, it's not about focusing on the behavior and trying to modify that. It's not about behavior modification. It's about heart transformation. And that's not just a tweetable, like, rememberable phrase that I have to remind myself about. It's so important because your kids are here to know God, love God, and be an example to others and how they live their lives. And the enemy knows that, and he knows how drastic and devastating it's going to be if the enemy can distract them with the temptation of sexual sin, and how entangling and damaging that is. And so really for those conversations, be aware that you're not lecturing, but you're having a conversation about such a sensitive topic, and really a powerful one. And when they ask questions, engage them truthfully and directly. And you don't need to go into all the explicit details, but be clear about what sex is and what God's plan and purpose for it is. Because believe it or not, Genesis 1 has, right out of the gate, some pretty clear, definite guidelines for what marriage is between a man and a woman, and they get this gift of sex in a marriage context. And there's such devastating consequences physically, emotionally, and relationally that will come as a result of taking just that one act of sex outside of marriage. And the whole New Testament, Paul says, come to know Jesus. You need Jesus to pay for your sins. And by the way, stop having sex outside of marriage. And so right away, believers come to know Jesus, and the next thing isn't a membership class in the early church. The next thing was a sex education class. Okay, here's how not to have sex before you're married, and here's what we're going to do about it. So it's interesting as I look at the scriptures, I'm like, wow, it's so apparent they needed just as much help as we do now. And I want to take a minute and just acknowledge the moms in the room who are single moms. And I can't imagine the amount of just your job. There's a lot in your life, and I can't imagine all that you carry every day. And to look at your kids and to realize it's my responsibility to have this conversation with my kids. And I want to encourage you, you can do it. God's given you the words to say and the wisdom to know how to say it, and engaging both your son and your daughter. And if the father is in your life and can have that conversation, then that's was saying, hey, when you walk down the city square and there's some sexual acts happening in your face, worshiping a false god, you should probably talk about the difference between false gods and the true God in that ancient culture. Now, thankfully, we have walls and buildings to put that in, but there's still sexual immorality happening all around us where people are having sex outside of marriage, and there's real consequences. So you might see something like this as you're driving down the road, and your son or daughter might read it, if they're old enough, and right away ask you, hey, so how come there's a dog on the billboard, and why do I need to get my wiener checked? Like, what? And it's a great opportunity for us as parents, both moms and dads, to just quickly engage and remind, hey, I'm a safe place you can talk to about this. Remember God's plan and design for sex to be in marriage? Well, when people disobey God, here's a real consequence. There's sexually transmitted diseases, and this is why our world is responding this way, but they're rejecting the truth and believing a lie. And so it's important that we engage them in any and every scenario, whether you're on the dinner table, driving in the car, or just at bedtime, because that's when all of our kids bring up the biggest questions: how to solve world hunger. Mommy, how come this? And you're like, oh, great, 2 hours later.
So we're going to move on to the stages. That's the back of your guys' worksheet. There's a lot of information, so we might have to kind of go through this. But again, this is a lot from the resources that we shared with you earlier. This is all to say that you know your children best. So if any of this is like, oh my gosh, my kid is not ready for that, but they're in this stage, you know your kid best. So we're not saying that this is exactly what you have to say to your kids at this time, but this is what most of our research said. And so we agree with most of it, obviously. That being said, use the godly wisdom and intuition that you guys have with your own kids. So from 0 to 2, believe it or not, there's a lot we can teach our kids right off the bat about God's design for sex, starting with just the blessing that God's given us of physical affection, touching your kids, holding them, cuddling them, teaching them from birth that physical touch and affection is good and it's needed and it brings intimacy between two people. Also, teach your kids from the time they're born that they are fearfully and wonderfully made. They have a creator who loves them. They are created. They don't just happen by chance. They're not an accident. God created them and he designed them in a beautiful way. God purposely designed our bodies. He designed boys and girls differently, and it's a good thing. So teach them that they are fearfully and wonderfully made, as it tells us in Psalms 139. And also get in the habit right off the bat. And if you haven't done this yet and your kids are older, start now. None of this is too late. So get in the habit from the time your kids are born of just opening the scripture, God's word, as a family, and just establishing that God's word in our home is ultimate authority. The rules we have in our home and the way we treat each other and why we do certain things is because God's word is ultimate truth, and we follow and obey God's word. And so later down the road, when you have this conversation of what sex is and why it's only between a man and a woman, it's not, they're not wondering why, and they're not wondering why maybe it's unfair. It's because they know these aren't mom and dad's rules. This is what God has to say about sex. So establish God's word as authority in your home.
That's right. In the ages 2 to 5, in that stage, most kids are going to be really curious about their bodies, especially at bath time. They become aware of the other genitals and parts that are there that they've ignored for the most part throughout the day. And I was encouraged when we were reading about this stage that our son isn't abnormal. Most boys actually figure that out and play with themselves and genitals in the bath, and so when that happens, you're not to be super alarmed and shocked and, how do I deal with this? But just to be clear and direct, hey, you're a boy, and this is what God's made you to be a boy, and this is the parts you have. And so to engage them, and girls as well, don't scold them for discovering parts of their body, but to be clear on what those are and their privates, and that's a huge word to bring up over and over, especially as they get older. They're going to need to know that those are their private parts. They need to protect them, guard them, and it's important that you do use the specific and words so that they're not confused later on, like, wait, I thought you said it was this, but now you're telling me it was this. So make sure you use the correct words for the body parts.
For girls, call it what it is. It's a vagina. Don't, all these things we're like, what do other people call it? It's not a special hole. A hoo-hoo, it's not a potty, or as our daughter coined it, a front bottom.
That's right. Leave it to Peyton. And it's a penis, not a ding-dong, a pee-pee, a dingy, or a winky. It's important that we use the correct terminology. I shared with my son, who's been pretty inquisitive, and he's pretty on it with things, and so I was engaging and just very clear and direct and abrupt about these terms. And he said them and was like, oh, wow, those are easy words to say, and he's processing it. And then I'm like, hey, son, so who do you talk to about these things? Like, who do you talk with? And he's like, oh, I talk to you, Dad. And I'm like, well, that's great, bud. He's like, I would never talk to anyone else. And he kind of knew, like, this is our special conversation. These are the things we talk about between a father and a son. And I said, well, as you get older, we could bring Mom and in on it. It's okay. We can't leave her out. It'll be helpful to bring her in on this conversation down the road, but I'm glad this isn't something you talk about with just anybody or your friends. And so that's something, again, to be aware of, that this is the age where we need to teach respect and honor of their own bodies, and then realize that their bodies are their own, and they need to protect them, specifically their private areas, and know what appropriate touch is and isn't.
Mm-hmm. During this stage also, it's important for us to model to them if you're married, it's important to model what a marriage and love looks like. It's so healthy to show our kids that Mommy and Daddy are in love and we're affectionate. It's okay to kiss and make out in front of your kids and hold hands and show them Mommy and Daddy are in love, and it's good. Like right before this, I was talking with Denise at our table, and she said, one thing I don't think we necessarily did well, not in her family, but as a church in whole over the years, is I think we've, which I agree with her, said so much, sex is bad, sex is bad, sex is bad. Let's not tell our kids sex is bad. Sex is good. It's a gift. Nothing from God is bad. Sex is good. It's bad when we take it out of the confines that he's given it to us in. So God has given us sex, and it's good, and it's for a mommy and a daddy in marriage. Sex is bad, and there's consequences when we take it outside of that. So it's good, we read around the age of 3 to start teaching your kids how to wash themselves, especially their privates, just as they're getting older and maturing. And it's kind of a good age to start being like, you can do this yourself. You don't always need Mommy or Daddy to wash yourself. Obviously, if they need help, that's fine. But just to keep in our minds, around the age of 3, they should be able to start doing this. Focus on the Family encourages that by about the age of 2, actually, we stop letting our children see the opposite sex naked. So I know, like, when our kids were babies, it was so easy to, like, throw them in the shower with us and bathe them. But it's Focus on the Family really encourages that by about the age of 2, daddies stop letting your little girl see you naked, vice versa. My mom has a funny story, actually. She said they stopped letting Kelly, my oldest, see my dad naked when she asked why Daddy has a tail, which was probably about 2. Around the age of 2, also, we can really teach our kids that you're never naked in front of strangers, and we're never naked out in public. Around the home after bath, we're running around in our diapers, that's different, but we don't do that in front of strangers. We don't do that out in public. And Focus on the Family really encouraged, this is the stage to play with your kid. Establish that closeness, that relationship with them, that will develop into open and comfortable communication with them as they get older.
That's right. And as you look at the gender, and they start to realize, there's boys and there's girls, and girls have cuties more or less at age 5 and 8, or girls that are kind of pretty with their long hair and they wear good smelling things, and boys stink bad, and smell bad. Around 5 to 8, there's kind of this trend where they start to realize the differences. And I was shocked when we were doing some research to find out that 100% of the secular resources that were telling you when to talk to your kids and how to talk to them and what to tell them, they were saying to specifically say that homosexuality is okay. So a guy can love a guy, and they can be married and all this at age 5. So they were saying at age 5 they need to know this before they go to kindergarten. And we're sending our son to kindergarten next year, and I was like, okay, this is real now. It's not me talking to a high schooler and they get to go home to their parents. This is my son gonna potentially hear this. And there's some helpful verses in 1 Corinthians 6:9 that are helpful as your kid gets older, to explain the difference of sexuality or homosexuality is a sin, but God paid for that sin through Jesus and redeemed it. And so it's helpful to even just be aware that conversation there's a potential for it to come up, and it's coming up more and more.
So at the age of about 5, it's helpful to have maybe a rule in your house like, we're not naked anymore in front of people. You're not a toddler anymore, you're not a baby. Even after bath time, it's not really appropriate to be running around the house naked. Naked time is when you're in the bath and you're bathing yourself, or when you're getting dressed. But other than that, there's not really a need. Just to start teaching them modesty around this age. And also, if your house permits in this age stage, it's really helpful to be able to separate bedrooms for boys and girls. If you're kind of wondering, when should I do that? Maybe around between 5 and 8, if your house allows. Obviously, if you don't have enough rooms in your house, that's fine. You just figure out other ways to create privacy. And let's see, around the age 6 is also the normal age for kids to start tending to have more friends of the same sex that they are. So boys will tend to have more friends who are boys and vice versa. This is normal and it's healthy. So that to say, if you don't feel like that's really happening with your kids, you can encourage it. You can encourage friendships of the same sex. Obviously, we're not to say that, I'm not going to say that boys and girls can't be friends. That's not what I'm saying. But if you're noticing about this age and your friends, your child's friends are like all of the opposite sex, do what you can as a parent to encourage them to reach out and make friends with boys with boys, girls with girls.
Yeah, and when you look at the differences between boys and girls, I want to encourage you to lean into those. Don't try and just blur the lines like the culture does, but show the differences, celebrate it, and encourage them. Hey, be a boy, girl, be a girl, and it's okay for girls to like baseball, and you don't have to be super hypersensitive about that, but just be aware of the differences between how the culture is going to treat it, and how God's designed us to function as a man and a woman. And around 7 or 8, if your child asks about sex, this is the age that, if you feel they're mature enough again, to answer them clearly, directly, and biblically what sex is and what the purpose and plan God had when he gave it as a sweet gift between a man and a woman to enjoy during a committed marriage relationship. And so be honest about that. Don't try and work around it or give them a different answer that's kind of sugar-coated, but just be direct. And it's important that they see the God's plan for marriage held high in your family, and to talk about sexual abuse. Around this age, they're around more people that you don't know all that well. They're at school, their practices, they're doing different things. So make sure they're aware of their body and their private parts and what good touch and bad touch is, and the differences.
Mm-hmm. So we're going to move on to the ages 8 to 10. If you haven't yet, kind of reiterating what Brandon said, this is a good time. If your kids are curious or asking, go ahead and share truthfully what God's design for sex is. Also, please talk to your children about puberty and that their bodies are going to change. I can't tell you how many girls I've talked to who literally thought they were dying when they started their periods because they thought they were bleeding to death because they've never been told what a period is. Lots of girls I've talked to have had this. So share with them. It's not something to be embarrassed or ashamed about. It's a good thing. It's a way God made us to be able to have children. It's fine. So talk to your kids about puberty, please. Also, This is a really good age to start teaching and talking constantly and modeling to your kids modesty. I kind of feel like this has become over the years a lost, art. And the reasons why to be modest, let's share with our girls how important it is. Go to the scriptures. There's lots in here about that. So talk honestly with your kids about that. And please monitor everything that your kids are seeing and hearing. Monitor the websites, monitor the TV shows. Don't let them have full access to Netflix. Don't let them be on it all the time. Don't let them have computers in their bedrooms. It's so dangerous, you guys. And so just be aware of what they're seeing and what they're hearing. And so that, one, you can protect them from it if it's inappropriate, and you as the parent can pull the plug. They don't need to watch TV. They don't need to go on the computer. They don't need to have cell phones. Like, you have the power to take those away if you think it's more detrimental to your kids. But also so that when they see things and they're hearing things that are contrary to what God's word has to say about it, you can share the truth with them. So you know what your kids are going through and the information that they're taking in.
That's right. And around age 8, give or take, is when the statistics show that it's the first time a boy is going to see porn. And so it's so important, especially with how prevalent our devices are and how easy it is for an older sibling to give a younger sibling the passcode to your phone. They ask a question, image pops up, and they're like, what do I do with this? They feel all those different emotions, shame, kind of curiosity, who do I talk to? It's important that you're engaging with your son or daughter and knowing what porn is and how damaging it is, psychologically, mentally, as they're developing. It creates these neural pathways that really just trigger, this is what this feels like when you see this image, and creates this false sense of reality. And it's so addicting. The research continues to support Scripture and its findings, and finding that porn is just as addicting as heroin or cocaine. And so it's very important at a young age when they're talking to you and when you're engaging them about the dangers of porn, that they know the effects of it as well. As we conclude into this last age group, looking at 10 to 12-year-olds.
So we're going to just go through this quick because we're pretty much out of time. But 10 to 12, if you haven't had the talk with them, talk with your kids about it. Please do it before junior high, because they will hear about it in junior high. At the age of 10 is the average time when sexual attraction begins. And so it's a good time to share with your kids about beyond physical attraction. Start talking to them about what really should be attracting us to other people, which is matters of the heart. So not only things that they can be attracted to, like character and values and whether that person loves the Lord or not, but also what kind of person we want to be. This is the age when it can be tempting to become obsessive about your body image as well. Encourage your kids not just to worry about their outside appearance, but to work on their heart and start growing in their walks with the Lord. God says in 1 Samuel, the Lord doesn't see as man sees. We look at the outside appearance, but God looks at our heart. So encourage this in your kids. At this age, they're old enough to understand that and to start working on their heart as well.
That's right. And as we look at 10 to 12, it really leaks into the later years as teenagers as well. And this is going to be a constant conversational piece, we hope, for you, is talking about the reality of lust and temptation. And Jesus just destroys any cultural kind of bar of where lust and temptation are when he says this in Matthew chapter 5, verse 27. He says, if a man looks at a woman with lustful intent in his heart, he's already committed adultery with her in his heart. And so bringing that up and having that as, a conversational piece. What is temptation? What do we do with temptation? What is lust? And how damaging can it be when we're constantly letting lust control what we think and what we look at? And as we wrap up our time, there's 3 things I boiled down this about 30-minute conversation we had with parents on just equipping you as parents to have a guide to teenage tech. And there's 3 main things I want to make you aware of that really dovetails in with this lust and temptation topic, is that technology can be helpful or hurtful. And the 3 things are, number one, your kids don't own the devices, you do. And so we put a contract on your table you can walk through with them, talk through. There's some good points in there to make them sign initial. It just makes it clear that, man, you're in control of the devices and they're using them. It's not a right, it's a privilege. Secondly, make sure you have the appropriate filters, website blocks, and accountability in place. There's some resources that's in a packet you can pick up that'll talk specifically through those and how to set those up. Most of them you do have to pay for. And lastly, make sure you're having open and honest conversations about how and when to use the devices and how they're being used, really. So when are you using the internet on your phone or computer, and how are you using them? A lot of times video games with prolonged hours now have access to the internet, and so it leads to a false sense of reality and pleasure that leads to porn use, and it's very damaging in the later years. Lastly, there's a book that Andy Stanley wrote, New Rules to Love, Sex, and Dating, that's also available for you to check out at the resource table with the other books we made you aware of. And this is more geared towards the teenage years from two perspectives. One, the kid who's becoming the person that they're looking for is his kind of bottom line, and that they're honoring God with their body and their lives. And secondly, when you have messed up sexually, there is forgiveness alone in Jesus, and how to change your perspective and direction on how you're living sexually in your life. So thanks for having us here. Thanks for having us here, and we'll be around.
Awesome. Thanks, you guys. Clearly, they could have probably shared for a full another hour. So that's where these questions come in. If you guys have a question that came up during this, or you've just been wanting to ask for a while, please write those down, because we do have opportunity in a little bit of a Q&A. So we would love to be able to utilize Brandon and Jenna and Dawn's mentor moms up here to provide you with some insight. So write those questions down over the next couple minutes and get them into the basket, and we will do our best to get through them. So as always, please feel free to keep getting up and get something to eat, go to the bathroom, get something to drink, anything like that. But we're going to cruise through our morning still, so we have a little something funny for you guys to watch, and then we're going to get going with our peer perspective.
Where do babies come from?
Ladies' tummies.
The ladies eat the babies?
No, they just get pregnant.
How are babies made?
The downstairs goes into the girls downstairs.
Do you know where babies come from? How are babies made?
Babes.
From babes?
No, from babes.
Oh, from boobs. How are babies made?
When moms and dad makes love.
What kind of loser makes love?
I don't know.
Do you know where babies come from?
In a little pea.
How are babies made?
They.
Why is it so funny?
It's weird.
What's weird about it?
Knowing that my parents have to do it.
Where do babies come from? Explain to him.
Their mom?
Their mom?
Tommy, I don't know.
You don't know? Explain to him how it works.
Me?
Yeah.
How they come, like, they come out of a vagina. I don't know vagina.
Do you know how babies are made?
Yeah.
How?
You say, blah, blah, she, blah, 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 she,
How are babies made?
Gross.
Why is it gross?
Because it's health.
What do you mean health?
I'm not in 5th grade yet. I should know this stuff.
What's so gross?
Just where it comes from. I've seen Star Wars, and it looks really gross and painful.
So there you go. I guess you could just show Star Wars and your kids will learn. Okay, so we're going to invite up Dawn. She's another fabulous part of the youth team here at ABC. And so Dawn is just going to add another great perspective, because she has walked her teenage kids through all of this. So she's going to share a little bit of her story and her experience with us. So welcome.
Thank you. Good morning. So my name is Dawn, and my husband and I have been married for almost 20 years this year, and we have 4 children. Our oldest is 24, and then we have 3 in high school. Joelle is 18, getting ready to graduate next month, and Jacob and Jackie are twins. They're sophomores this year, just turned 16. So we're definitely familiar with everything that Brandon and Jenna talked about. I also am involved in student ministry, so I see firsthand how difficult it is for our teens to really know how to navigate the whole purity thing. It's something that kids struggle with, even the kids in the church. Sometimes, especially the kids in the church. So I just echo what Brandon and Jenna said about the importance of talking to your kids often and early. I have notes on my phone. So I'm just going to kind of share what we did with our kids and how that worked out for us. So when our kids were little, Jeff and I decided that it was very important for us to instill how important purity was to them, because Jeff and I were not raised in Christian homes, and we did not enter our marriage pure, and that brought a lot of baggage into our marriage, and we don't want that for our kids. So when they were young, we started praying for them. We prayed for their purity. We prayed for their future spouse. We prayed that most importantly, that their faith would become their own, that it wouldn't be our faith, but that they would have a genuine faith of their own, that they would know and love Jesus Christ as their Savior. Because really everything else flows from that, right? So we put our marriage first before our kids. Our kids all know that our relationship with each other comes before anything, that any of their needs, any of their wants. Our marriage is number one after our relationship with God. We invest time in our kids. We date them one-on-one. My husband has dates with our girls. I have dates with our son. They know that we are their number one. Jeff is my girl's number one guy, and I am our son's number one gal. We feel that if they feel secure in their relationship with us, that they're not going to be looking for fulfillment in a relationship outside of our home, that they're not going to need a girl to fulfill them or a boy to fulfill them. They have that relationship with us. We talk about sex, and we have since they were young. We talk about the fact that sex is a precious gift that they will someday give to their spouse, that it's not something to be afraid of, it's not something that's gross or sinful if it's done in the way that God planned for sex. They understood before they had the talk, I think in 5th grade, they understood their body parts, how babies were made. They would have been able to answer those questions truthfully. They weren't grossed out when they heard the conversation in class because they already knew it. We invest in our kids' spiritual growth. We talk to our kids about who they are in Christ, that is their identity, that they should not conform to this world, that they should look different from the rest of the kids on campus because they are set apart. Romans 12:2 says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect. So we have spent a lot of time just really building our kids up in their relationship with God, making sure that they understand that they don't have to go along with the crowd just to fit in, that if they don't fit in, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with being set apart, and they're secure in their relationship with God, and so they don't feel that need to be as accepted by their peers, although they are, they have a lot of friends, and they're popular in some aspects, but they're seen as different, and that's okay. When they were ready, we did a purity trip with them. So that's what this is here. We used Passport to Purity. It's kind of old, so it looks probably pretty funny. I'm sure that they have a lot of more recent versions of it, but this was a family life program, and we went through it with each of our kids when they were 10. That was the age we thought that was appropriate. We thought they were ready for it, and it's just a really good resource. There are many different resources out there that you could use, but I definitely encourage you to use something when you feel that they are at an age where they're ready for this conversation. Take them away one-on-one, have a trip with them, carve out that time, make it special, and talk to them about why purity is so important, and help. This is really good because it helps them see what pitfalls are out there, how easily they can fall into something, and then get to a point where they don't know how to get themselves out. They, once they allow a little bit in, it's hard to stop. A small little kiss leads to a long kiss, and a long kiss leads to something else. And we, at the end of this trip, we had our kids decide what they wanted their boundaries to be, and how far they were willing to go before they realized that this is outside of my comfort zone. If I go any further, I'm afraid I'm going to go past what I'm comfortable with. And so our kids all decided on their own a little bit differently. One of them said she wanted to be 16 before she dated, and that she would only go as far as holding hands and hugging, no kissing. And she wanted her first real kiss to be on her wedding night. Our son decided he doesn't even want to date until he's in college. He doesn't see the point of it. He doesn't want to. he doesn't want the distraction and the drama, really, that goes along with dating relationships. So we'll see what happens with that, but that's his plan right now, is to wait till college. That's what's really cool about this, is that they make those decisions for themselves. It's not you telling them this is what your boundary needs to be, and don't go any further. And they, after going through this whole program, they realize that there are reasons for having those boundaries in place, and then you can help keep them accountable to stay to those boundaries. We have regular discussions with our kids about purity, and we talk about what they see and hear on campus, and how what kind of things their peers are dealing with, the relationships that their friends are in, and how things change once intimacy gets introduced into those relationships, and how traumatic it is when those relationships end if they have introduced sex into that relationship. That's something that they see every day, and they don't want that for themselves. We set up dating rules. So we have set rules in our family that pertain to dating. So there are 3. Our kids have known them since they were young, so it didn't come as a surprise now that they're teenagers what these rules are. Number 1 is that they don't date the unknown. So that means that anybody that they want to date has to be somebody that has been in our home many times. We know them personally. Nobody of the opposite sex leaves the house with one of our kids without first being interviewed by my husband. So a lot of young men have had to sit through interviews, and so far we haven't interviewed any girls. I don't know, maybe that's different, huh? But many boys have had interviews, and they're usually really good interviews. So a couple of the boys have probably cried afterwards, but for the most part, I think that they've done okay. Our second rule is that we don't date unbelievers. So they know that if the person that they want to go on a date with is not a believer, it's not even up for discussion. We believe strongly that they need to seek out other believers, because that's what Scripture says. And then third is that they don't date alone. So They are never in a position where they're going on a date by themselves with somebody of the opposite sex. They're never in any type of situation where they're under pressure or they could be questioned. So they don't date alone. One of the things that we do in our family is we try to say yes to as much as we can, as far as things that our kids want to do, places they want to go. We try to say yes. That way, when we do say no, it's for the big stuff. We save our no's for the big stuff, and they know that if we say no, that there's a really good reason for it. We tell our kids to use us as an excuse if they're ever in a situation where they are uncomfortable or don't really want to do something, to use us as an excuse that, oh my gosh, if my parents find out, I'll be in so much trouble, so I need to go. I just can't be here. We're always happy to be their excuse. And we're just really involved in our kids' lives. So we have a home where our kids and their friends are always welcome. We usually have a house full every weekend. They hang out. We're involved in our kids' friends' lives, and that's the way we want it. We know what's going on with our kids pretty much all the time. So far, like I said, Joelle's graduating next month. I'm happy to say that she will graduate with only having had one very short-term boyfriend. It lasted about a month and a half, 2 months, and she realized for herself that it was too much pressure, that she wasn't really ready for that. So I was really proud of that decision that she made, and she will graduate with only having held hands and had a kiss on the cheek and on the forehead. So I'm pretty happy with that, and that's how she'll go off to college. So, and Jacob and Jackie are finishing their sophomore year. They have not had a boyfriend or girlfriend and don't have any interest in doing so. So I would say so far they're doing pretty good, and I feel strongly that prayer for our kids is the main reason why, investing in their spiritual growth and being involved in their lives. So.
Cool. I didn't even have to give you my little 2-minute warning. Okay. I have a couple questions in here. So if you guys have any more, jot them down and come up and find me. I'm going to have the basket. We are going to invite up our panel. So Jenna and Brandon are going to come back up. Dawn, you probably didn't have to go very far. Come on back up. Gail's going to come up. And we're going to work through these. And if we get through what's in here and have time and you would like to just stand up and ask a question, you're welcome to do that if we have extra time, but keep jotting those down. You might even come up with a question as we talk.
And mentor moms, you might want to bring them up because somebody might have a question that they wrote down but might not want everybody to know that that's their question. So there shouldn't be, don't feel any shame at all, but mentor moms, just be willing to be runners if need be. There we go. Perfect. Okay, so guys, I just really strongly encourage you to take advantage of the resources that you have available. People who've been through it, I've been through it, but it was a long time ago, but we had some great experiences with our kids as well. Okay, question number 1. What if you didn't follow God's plan in your own life? How do you teach them to do it differently and answer their questions honestly? Good point.
Yeah, obviously, that's where we're at. So, first of all, we're very honest with our kids. We admit our failures and how that affected us. We talk to them about why God has a different plan and how much better it is to follow God's plan.
Yeah, can I look at the question again? Sorry, I'm a guy. If you don't. So, the huge thing there is this word grace, I think, to really let them know. The culture doesn't talk about grace, and a lot of teenagers or, as we grow, we make mistakes, and there's a God of grace that no other religion has, and because he's the one true God, and his forgiveness can give you a fresh start. And so to talk through that and realize there might be some physical consequences and there are real consequences to sin, but God's grace is enough and sufficient to remove a lot of that shame and guilt and regret, and you can be a new person in Christ. And so that's what I'd really encourage, and to let them know there is a new way to live, and let's talk about how to make some healthier decisions there.
And give yourself grace. Don't live with shame and guilt. Give yourself grace. God has forgiven you, so forgive yourself and let your kids see that. Model that for your kids, because our kids are going to mess up too. So show them, hey, mommy has messed up in a lot of ways, but God has forgiven me and I experience his grace every day. And you're going to mess up. So if your kids don't follow God's plan for sex, a lot of ours won't. That's the truth. And so when that happens with your own kids, extend grace and forgiveness. Our Father does nothing less.
That just answered a question. What if your kid has already gone past the boundaries they set for themselves, or you set for them? So, argument on that one. Here's one. When should brothers or sisters stop doing bath time together?
The book said about the age of 2. A lot of the books said kind of about the age of 2, between like 2 and 3, really. We stopped doing bath time around the age of 2 with them because I was tired of them touching each other. And it was stop touching each other. But I don't know, every home might be different, but that's what most of the book said.
So the question is from the video, I think, or maybe someone else said, please correctly answer the question by an 8-year-old. Mommy, how does a baby, this was the Facebook post, Jenna. Mommy, how does a baby get into a woman's belly? So how would you
So specifically, right? Does someone want to take this one? I can do it. It's just I'm one out of 90 ladies.
I know one of the things that I had read when my kids were little was to answer them honestly, but so sometimes we think they want or need to know everything, and it just might be way too much information for them. So to answer correctly, but to give maybe a brief overview, and then if they continue to pursue it and to continue to ask questions, then to answer those questions honestly and frankly. So one of my kids was very persistent in questions at about 6 years of age, whereas whereas some of my others were much older before they began asking those kinds of questions. So I had to tailor it to their specific age. But with an 8-year-old, I would, if assuming that you've been having casual conversations, as was encouraged earlier, which I thought was great advice, then to be pretty specific and pretty frank, and to just say, well, you know what? That's a special gift that God has given to mommies and daddies, and a mommy and daddy will enjoy a special time together. And if they need more information, then you can say, I would suggest that you say, well, the daddy's penis goes inside the mommy, and that's how babies are made, and then the baby grows there, and it's a very special time that God has given for mommies and daddies.
And if you've been teaching your kids the proper terms for body parts, then they're saying things like penis and vagina, which we say them and we're like, don't make it like that. We can kind of set the tone for that with our kids.
Yeah, and I think it's helpful to just obviously, like Gail said, if they need the details and info and they're mature enough, just the penis, the vagina, the sperm, and the egg is enough to be. You don't need to go into all the graphic details and when and how, but I was pretty, Jen and I went back and forth on okay, how, when, because I'm the youth pastor dealing with, okay, I need to know the info because I've seen so many kids not have any idea what's going on, so then they go to YouTube, which goes to porn, which years later they're addicted to porn, and that's not healthy sex. And so I think it's very wise to keep it as simple and clear and direct as possible. Because you don't want to give them too much info, like Gail said, that's over their head and they don't know what to do with it.
So hopefully not very many of you will have this situation, but like I said, one of my kids had heard something in school and was very inquisitive and was very persistent. So at 6, I was asked that question, and I gave a real general answer, and I mean, it was just honed in on. And so basically it finally came down to, but mommy, something must happen in order for the daddy to be able to help that baby grow in the mommy. Doesn't something from the daddy have to go inside the mommy at 6 years of age? And so I was like, oh man, here we go. And so I knew that I couldn't just get by with fluff. But honestly, that would be super unusual. Not very many 6-year-olds are going to be that persistent, but just a little vague general answer did not cut it.
So I'll just share one. We do a panel with our high school girls. Every February, Brandon does, the whole month is like relationships and sex, basically. God's designed for that. And at the end, we separate girls and boys, and we do a panel, and we're like, ask us anything. And every time, girls want to know about masturbation. And they're being taught it's not just normal, it's healthy. It's good and it's healthy. 1, you don't need a man to make you happy. And 2, it only involves you. You're not hurting anybody else. So it's good. It's healthy. Like, satisfy yourself. Do it. So they're not just taught it's okay. They're taught, like, do it. It's good. And these are girls asking us these questions who are in, like, Christian homes who've been raised in the church. So don't be shocked when your kids come to you with these questions. So examples of how sex has been perverted, in every single way it's been perverted. But yeah, the question about specifically the masturbation question, it's one of the biggest things we've seen. I think I've seen change within the girls over the past 10 years is I didn't used to get asked questions as much about it as I do now. It comes up every year, and they're confused. They're just really confused. So they're being taught that it's good, it's healthy. Same with porn. More and more girls are viewing porn and even becoming addicted to porn. A lot of it happens on accident. They're curious. I've talked to so many girls who say, I just was curious, and so I was too embarrassed to ask my mom. I wanted to know what it looked like or whatever, so I looked online really quick, and they're like, every time it makes me so sad because they're so filled with shame, and it starts with just an itch of curiosity, and they can't stop looking at it. So culturally, and even in schools, I've had students tell me, our teachers tell us it's good. Even pornography, again, the same thing. It's good. It doesn't hurt anybody. It's okay for you to look at it. It's healthy for you. If you can satisfy yourself, go for it. So, and it's so damaging. Like Brandon said, the science behind porn, it's not just Christians are saying it's bad. Scientifically, it rewires your brain, and it becomes an addiction. And it doesn't allow you to find it. It disconnects you from other people, and it affects every part of your being. And it's so sad that so many of our teens are already just so broken by this.
So I have a question kind of tied into that. So I have a 9, a 10-year-old, 2 girls, and then a 2-year-old. So we have covenant eyes on everything, and it's exhausting because some stuff can get in there. I was just talking to them today, but I feel like it's constant. I'm constantly what did that song just say?
Mm-hmm.
They have this little dress-up game, and I opened it the other day, and the pop-up was 2 people having sex, animated, and it was supposed to be rated for 9 years old.
This is she's saying on
It's
the
a
internet.
game
It's a game,
on
and
their
then
iPad
there's
or-
a commercial, and it's totally. We found the same thing with anything on YouTube or anything.
Yeah.
So then we got on Pinterest yesterday. It's fishing photos, full frontal nude photos. oh, look at that. Look. And then my husband, like, is more free with, like, oh, here's your iPad. Here's, I'm like, no, don't give that to them. But I feel like it's like we attack one thing and then something else pops up. And so it's like this constant reality of, like, it's in their face.
I didn't. That's even with Covenant Eyes on your computer.
Well,
To
no, so see, Covenant Eyes can't block apps. So Covenant Eyes is working great for like email, that's the browser, like we don't have Safari and all that. But I was talking this morning and they can't monitor apps. Like, and it's something that has to do with like spyware and stuff. So
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. So, whether they download another app, they create a new email address, they borrow a friend's phone, they go down the street and there's a dirty magazine under a tree, under a rock that their friend knew about that took them to that path. There's a way to look at it, and so that's exhausting, and we're gonna lose the battle by just trying to build walls, and in the sense of resting with that being the answer. Covenant Eyes, xxchurch.com has some stuff that will take over the Safari browser on your iOS device, so or your mobile devices. But even with that, you borrow your friend's phone or they text you a picture, and it's hard in that sense. And that's where we go back to the main point being not about the behavior modification or having these. They're great helps, and they're a great like second. You know, the device is the parents. Secondly, we have these barriers and filters. So that thirdly, the ongoing conversations, when are you using your devices, what are you looking at, why are you looking at them? It comes back to that conversation that is, on one hand, exhausting, but I can't imagine having zero conversations about it and yet just letting them navigate, and that's resulted directly in the increase of females viewing porn and struggling with the new narrative that it's okay to masturbate for both male and female. That's always been the case for men. You know, when I was doing construction, it was like every day, do you do this? Why don't you do this? Why are you fighting this? You know, and the constant, incessant, like, just be like us, just be like everybody else. So I can't even imagine what high school is like or junior high because of the little bit I've heard. And for you as parents, I don't envy you. I'm not looking forward to getting to that stage knowing what I know, because there is some great tools that you can have in addition to Covenant Eyes to block your kids' friends' devices from getting onto inappropriate websites at your house. It's an additional charge, which kills me. And then they get you to buy the device, but then there's subscription fees. So it's kind of one of those things, even with that, there's another end around. So bringing it back to, biblically, we see God's plan in view. Culturally, we see it wasn't an app that could access nudity and inappropriate. That stuff was happening down at City Hall in Sunken Gardens. And so when you walk to the junior high, you were seeing these, you know, sex acts for false gods that these junior highers were being exposed to every day out in the streets, you know, in some cities. And so it reminds me that we're not that far advanced from where we were biblical times. We still need the same Jesus, and we need to have those conversations as parents with our kids so that when they see stuff, they do guard their eyes. They do guard their hearts from looking and viewing that. And it is so damaging. And you see going back to the question, if I could steer back, the question about homosexuality and masturbation. In Romans 1, John Piper says that homosexuality is worshiping the sex self. And so as we hear about this new narrative with masturbation, you're really pleasing yourself, you're worshiping yourself, your self-identification, whether it's gender or age, it's all about you, which again is replacing God with the creation rather than the creator being the main focus in this homosexuality. So as parents, that's a tidbit for you as you're dialoguing. How am I talking with my kids about God, number one, being the creator? Romans 1 talks through God being the creator and that truth being exchanged with the creation being elevated. And the end result was God's wrath and people being attracted to their sex selves. And that's a really, really helpful but really dense passage in Romans 1 to talk through with your kids about homosexuality. My favorite passage to turn to is 1 Corinthians 6, 9 through 11. And it gives you a whole list of sins. So the sexually immoral will not inherit the kingdom. 1 Corinthians 6, 9 through 11 goes through envy, liars, cheaters, and then it says homosexuality or many who practice homosexuality will not inherit the kingdom. And most people, it's great for two reasons. One, it teaches biblical literacy, that you don't take anything out of context. That verse, a lot of people misquote it and say homosexuals won't go to heaven. Well, neither will liars or cheaters or envious, and so it puts it into context. We're all sinners, and we all need Jesus. And right away, Paul says, some of you were homosexuals, liars, cheaters, stealers, but you were justified and you were saved because of Jesus. And so it helps them see right away that anything we think is good or call good may not be good if God calls it sin in our culture, and helps us bring it back to that. So those are two verses I'd encourage you to share with your kids when they're old enough. And they may come to you, like Gail said, at a young age where it's surprisingly that they're talking about these. I heard a couple stories of just words like transgender being thrown around on the playground, first and second grade, coming home. Hey, Mom, like, I heard the girl's a transgender. And they're like, wait, what? Do you know what that means? They don't have a clue. Like Gail said, it's over their head. But it could be, hey, let's talk about God made men and women to be married, and here's God's view and purpose for sex. And so it could be another opportunity. But you bring up a very valid and great point that the battle's beginning, and it's going to wage for a long time. And so to realize, this famous pastor, D.L. Moody, got done getting a haircut, and he walked out, and he was walking down the steps, and a guy looked at this girl walking down the street, and he just tracked her with his eyes. And D.L. Moody, this famous pastor, put his arm around him and said, just to remind you and to reassure you, the battle is still struggling for me, and the young man's like, so it just kind of puts into context that for both guys and girls, there's going to be a constant temptation that we're struggling with because we're in a fallen world.
Well, I think that just like everything else, it's going to boil down to really just working with your kids and teaching them what is okay and what isn't, and praying that when a situation like that comes along, that they're going to be strong and be able to say, this is not okay, I'm not allowed to watch this, and remove themselves. So much of it boils down to spending time and just teaching your kids, and really putting in the hard work when they're young, so that when they're older, they know right from wrong. They know what's expected of them, and hopefully you can trust them to make those wise choices, because it's going to happen. They're going to go. My son, I can't tell you how many times he's been on the bus going to a football game, and there's a whole group of kids, and they are passing their phones around with porn, and he has had to make the tough decision to move up a few rows and stay away from them, because he knows that that's not what he wants. And he knows that because we've talked to him over and over and over about the importance of safeguarding his eyes.
I don't mess around. I'm like, dude, man up. Like, I've seen so much heartache and really lives being destroyed, and years of addiction lead to ruined marriages, and it's one of those things that I think a little bit of encouragement, and as a guy, not knowing anything about a topic is intimidating, because you want to know how to do it right, and you want to do it the best you can. And so I think the helpful thing for Jenna and I is to be on the same page. And even for some of the time I want to say something, and I run it by her, and she makes it, and I'm like, oh, I can say it that way. That gets the point across better. And so maybe kind of trying to partner with him, or hey, what are some resources, or this could be a cool idea. And I think adding resources to the conversation would help, hopefully him feel more comfortable talking about it.
Yeah, and I think probably whoever wrote that question, that's their dream, would be to be on the same page. And so it's tough when that's not the case for you. I think I would just say, first of all, pray about it. I mean, just, don't even let him know that you're praying that God would work in his heart and change that. I think you can just be candid and, not pushing, nagging. That's going to do the exact opposite of what you want, but just saying, hey, I think it's super important for us to just make this be an okay subject. We don't want it to be taboo, and then model it in front of him. If the kids say something or something comes up at bath time, I think to just be really casual about it. That's probably a big piece of advice I would give, is to not act shocked. If your kids, trust me, they will say something that blows you out of the water or that you feel super unprepared to answer. Don't let them know that they've caught you off guard. Just try to act like it's no big deal, like they just said, what's for dessert? And just try to be frank and candid and honest. And if you're uncertain, then you know what? That's okay to say. Just say, you know what? I'm not exactly sure how to answer that question right now, sweetie. Let me do a little bit of reading and get back to you on it, or something to that effect, but not make it seem like, oh, I wasn't supposed to mention this subject. That's the worst thing that you can do. So if your husband can see you act naturally and like it's not that big of a deal around the kids, maybe that'll help rub off on him. But I think too, encouraging him to read some resources that would help him feel more comfortable would be great. Denise wants to say something, and then Kimberly.
Didn't you say there's a video though, Brandon?
Yeah.
Some guys don't read.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the reading thing would be, like a tweet, 160 characters. That's max for guys. Spark Notes. But audio and visual aids are the best, obviously. And there's a video on XXX Church where they do a little kind of walk through how to talk to your kids about sex. And it's more for the guys to watch and to be equipped with those resources. And
So repeat that one more time.
so it's xxxchurch.com. And they have a ton of resources. It's literally 3 X's now.
Right.
Yeah, it's 3 X's.
xxchurch.com.
Correct.
And that is a guy named Craig Gross, and you could even just Google him, like Craig Gross, how to talk to your kids about sex, and a ton of resources and videos are going to pop up.
Perfect.
Craig Gross, yeah.
Denise, did you want to say something real quick? Oh, absolutely talk to him. Yeah, it would be, then that would be akin to being a single mom, and you just know a parent needs to talk to their child. And it'd be ideal if the father's talking to the son and the mom to the daughter, but if not, then definitely super important.
Yeah.
It's got to be louder though. If you're going to talk, you got to talk loud. Exactly.
And now he can, you said?
That's what I was, trying to
Yeah.
say. I think if you model it, that it's not that big. It's not that intimidating,
Yeah.
especially when they're young.
And I think for maybe, like we've talked a lot with our staff even, maybe for a lot of the guys, they had like a traumatic experience with their own dads growing up, or a lack of experience. And so they're like, my dad never talked to me, or it was awful. I don't know, so like you said, model it, and maybe they'll realize, oh, I can do this.
Were there any other questions, Megan? No? Okay, great. Deb?
What a cool opportunity if maybe that couple could talk to you two, because you're so gracious, and he'd be able to hear from a guy that's comfortable about it. And there's a wonderful value in that.
Yeah.
You make it comfortable, that's wonderful.
Yeah, and I kind of spoke from personal, like how I would direct it, but Gail's perspective was really helpful from the wife and how to go about. So I want to clarify, because you're like, hey, Brandon just told him to man up, but that won't translate well. If you say that, so yeah, that's the nagging category. Gail, take notes on what Gail said, and be encouraged that if he, and I've talked to a lot of guys, and this is one of those things where a lot of people have seen, like, hey, there's a reason why you're asked to do this. Guys come to me, interns, students come to me all the time. It's like I have a magnet. I'm like, God, did you put a billboard above me? Like, why are we? But it's so encouraging, because it's so important, and it's great to see some of you taking this seriously and figuring out how do we incorporate, how do we continue to have these conversations. And it's a great testimony you shared. You just jumping in, going for it, and praying for your husband, and he jumped in right with you. So that's great.
No.
No.
And I think what Brandon and Jenna said in the beginning, I think Jenna said it, is so true, that it's not just the talk. I mean, there might be the talk at some point, but you've led up to it with lots of conversations. And it's just casual, and it's okay, and it's no big deal to talk about sex with mom and dad. That's the environment that you want to set. And then, but I do think that when you do, I did the same thing. I took my kids my girls each away individually, and Tom did with our son, and had one opportunity when, you did hit on all of the details, and Pathway to Purity sounds like a great resource. We use something much more ancient than that now. But it was great because it brought up the topics and then helped them think of questions. And so it takes away the awkwardness. But yeah, that's definitely done on a one-on-one basis. Mm-hmm. So, Brandon and Jenna graciously said if any of you have other questions that you want to ask, but you're not comfortable doing it in a public setting, that they would be really happy to talk with you. I know they'd be happy to, if your husband were willing. Dawn and myself, not that any of us claim to be experts, but if you have any other questions, we'd be happy to answer them, or do our best to answer them, address them as well. I saw somebody pointing. Yes, one, good, perfect.
Yeah. Do you want to?
You probably have more recent experience with that, but I would say, in all honesty, probably do go into it, would be what I would say, because if you don't, he'll hear it from someone else, and it's likely going to be inaccurate or from a very worldly perspective. So again, that's where you try to not look uncomfortable, even though you're dying inside, and you just answer it frankly, especially an 11-year-old boy. Just real quick, when Kimberly and Brittany, my oldest daughter and niece, were in college, they were hub group leaders, and so that was a long time ago, and I remember them being shocked and appalled that their junior high girls were saying that kids were having oral sex on the school bus. So, I mean, that was how many years ago? So it's out there, and 11 years old, I mean, I don't want to freak you out or panic you, but, if they're not already in middle school, they're close, and that kind of stuff is going on, so we have to be proactive. We want them to hear things from us.
Mm-hmm. I heard just literally this week from a friend that said that she heard in an elementary school they found kids having oral sex in the bathroom at 4th grade. So it's happening. It's awful, and it's happening, and that disgusting language that your son is hearing, it's awful, but the reality is that's the world we live in. That's the culture he's in. We can't keep our kids in a bubble, but what we can do is share honestly God's view. So give them what details you can, but stress, give them the details, but really go into stressing why taking sex outside of God's design is so hurtful and damaging and harmful, and the consequences that come alongside it that last your whole life. Because at least, like Gail said, he's going to want the answers. So he'll hear the answers somewhere, whether it's true or not, but at least if you give the answers simple enough to satisfy his question, but then you can go into detail about the spiritual side of it.
Yeah, and the question you asked, how do you prevent that, or how do you help him? Your friends are your future. The sooner your kids get that, the better. And so who they're around is going to be who's talking to them, who's telling them these things. And so that's so hard, because at that age they're wanting friends. That's a big thing, and they're trying to figure out who they are and who their friends are. So your friends are your future. Secondly, as they said, I think to summarize that really is what I read, that your kids are going to hear things, or they may see things, but they have no clue, again, what exactly they're hearing or seeing. And so to acknowledge and identify, and then bring it back, like they both said so well, to God's word and his purpose and plan in marriage, and then hold that high, shine the light on it, and let them know this is where it's taken out, and this is why it's wrong and hurtful. So yeah, and it's tough, but yeah, it's great advice.
I think it's time for us to wrap up. Great questions, great discussion. Let me just close this up in a word of prayer. God, thanks so much for Brandon and Jenna and their willingness to come share just some of the things that they have seen and addressed during their time working with our youth. God, we live in a corrupt world, and frankly, it's a little frightening as parents, but God, I just pray that we would find our trust and our hope in you, and that we would be diligent to be like Brandon and Jenna emphasized over and over, to be stressing to our kids the importance of a godly viewpoint and just letting them know that, yeah, we live in a world that tries to corrupt what God has made as good. And sex is good, and that's such a healthy attitude to have, but that it needs to take place within the confines of marriage. And I just pray, God, that as these young moms are navigating what their kids see and hear and trying to figure out how to answer that you would give them wisdom. I go back to James 1 over and over, that if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all men generously and without reproach. And God, we just claim that promise, even in this topic of talking to our kids about sex. We love you, Lord. Thanks for the day. In your name, amen. Don't forget to pick up your kiddos soon. There are handouts and tech resources right over at the table. Some of the other resources that they used, and there's still a couple more copies of the Helping Your Kids Learn Respect and Honor.